Welcome to Muddled Minds. So Pluto. We all know Pluto. It used to be our ninth planet. Prior to 2006, when the International Astronomical Union declassified it as a dwarf planet. Now, a dwarf planet, many people hated the definition because what that did is it made Pluto seem like it was less important. In the fact that, well, it wasn't really saying that it was a mini planet, they put it in a whole nother category on its own. Because once Aries was discovered in 2003, it was another planet-sized object that was in the Kuiper belt that was about the same size as Pluto, very similar properties. Now, was this our 10th planet? And so eventually they had to come up with a better definition of what classifies a planet, and that definition basically kicked Pluto out of the ring. And basically that definition kind of went to around the point of the planet must orbit the sun. It must not be a moon. It is rounded by its own gravity edge, and the gravity that hits within its size is able to make itself round and pull itself in. Of course, that kind of depends on what it's made out of and stuff, because like the moons, Jupiter and stuff, they're small, they're more icy, they'll pull themselves together easier than if it was like a rock of similar size of an asteroid. It'd still be a funky shaped object. But it still is talking about big objects, because obviously that kills the whole, not a moon, or it's got to be orbiting the sun. Or obviously, also the other big thing was clearing the orbit of other objects. Now this was one of the big downfalls that Pluto had, which is why they declassified it as a planet, made it a dwarf planet. It had difficulty making it out of Neptune's orbit on many occasions along its, orbit around the sun. And essentially, that led to its demotion of a planet, and it became a dwarf planet. But recently, there's been a lot of scientists, because obviously there's still a lot of people that still want to classify Pluto as a planet, and there's a lot of people that are like, no, it's a dwarf planet or whatever, especially since there's a crap ton of objects out in the Kuiper belt that are similar sized, and they have similar features as Pluto. Obviously, the New Horizon that we got a lot of nice photos information from this last year had definitely got a lot of people excited about Pluto again, even though there was a lot of, excitement lost after that demotion. But essentially, there's a new geophysical definition, basically, of what makes a planet. And it basically focuses more on the physical properties versus the orbital characteristics, because like before, it was the orbital characteristics. It goes around the sun, it's able to hold its own gravity, it's not around a planet, so it's orbiting the sun, and it's not orbiting some other object. And, it clears orbits of other objects, so it's orbits. But now they're more worried about the fact that as long as it's round, obviously, so it's still got that gravity thing going on it. And basically what it says is a planet is a substellar mass body that has never undergone nuclear fusion and that has a significant self-gravitation to assume a spherical shape adequately described by a triaxial ellipsoid regardless of its orbital parameters. So that means it could orbit another planet, or it could just be orbiting the sun, and it could... Basically, it just says it's got to be round. It's got to have gravity, enough gravity to make itself round. It's got to have its own gravity. And with this definition, though, the thing is, that would mean there's 110 planets in our solar system versus the 8 that we know right now. So, yeah, this new definition, I don't know if it's going to fly, but it's definitely some scientists have been putting some papers in recently about trying to get this stuff approved to the International Astronomical Union. But of course, 110 planets. Can you imagine you kids having to remember 110 planets in the solar system? Bad enough when you had to remember 9, am I right? But yeah, so new definition. So that means we could be on the wake of Pluto becoming a planet again. But that would also mean that moons like Titan and Europa and similar objects throughout our solar system would also be referred to as planets. And that's kind of weird, because obviously they're kind of like a mini planet, I guess, and that's just they're orbiting a different object. But the original definition, definitely they should take the whole must be orbiting the sun factor in there and not orbiting another object, because that would probably kill a lot of that 110, because then you wouldn't be defining moons as planets, because it's a moon. So I don't know why they'd be trying to define a planet as a moon, but this new definition does. And so what that would do is it would probably cut out a lot. And it just seems obvious. Yes, it should be round and it should be orbiting the sun. Now the whole orbital, clearing orbits, I don't think that's as important because, depending on the mass of the object and the orbital, since they're more elliptical, it could potentially cut into some other ones. So that doesn't necessarily have to be one of the defining factors, which is one of the reasons this paper is trying to point out and saying, get rid of that defining factor. Of course, it kind of got rid of the whole orbiting sun factor too, which is probably a bit much, but we'll see what happens because, well, planets, how we define what is going on in space helps people understand what's important and how astronomy is important and how things actually work beyond Earth, although a lot of people are kind of stuck to them and there and the now on their little planet. But if we can kind of make more sense and kind of broaden the scope of what we understand to be, actual planets in our solar system, we'd actually be able to get more people actually involved and more into what's actually going on in the solar system ourselves. Because obviously right now there's definitely going to be some cuts and stuff with NASA and a lot of government stuff, and it's harder to get people to fund NASA budgets and make it so they can actually do stuff and actually go beyond Earth. Now obviously Pluto, it's kind of one of those things. Well, we sent something that flew by it. We took a bunch of pictures and sent it back. It's cool, but we knew nothing about Pluto compared to what we do now after we got all that information from the New Horizon that flew by. So now that we got that, there's so much more information we know about Pluto. The fact that there's a lot of rounded surfaces on it, so it's hard to say, is it actually a planet? Is there actually some kind of temperature, chemical thing going on it that's keeping the surface, the icy surface, kind of remounting and reforming itself to keep it so the impact craters aren't so present? There's got to be something going on. There's some geothermal of some sorts. The question is, what makes a planet? Now, obviously, there's the old definition and there's the new definition. Really, they're kind of very similar in essence. It's just one more refers to clearly straight up physical properties, and the other one's referring to primarily the orbital. Obviously, though, I think we're going to have to combine them and just kind of make it so it's more of, yes, it must orbit the sun. Yes, it must have enough gravity to keep itself rounded and whole. But we don't necessarily have to worry about it clearing orbits, because that's one feature of the definition that it doesn't necessarily have to be true, because there are probably plenty of other planets that are actually planets in our definition that we'd like to call planets that also don't clear the orbit of other planets in other solar systems. Because, well, we have one solar system as an example, and we can only define things off of what we see around us. And what we see could easily be unique, and it's not actually something that can be found outside of our solar system. So it's hard to define something without having more sample size. Of course, we're doing the best we can with what we have, and because of that, I definitely think we can easily consider Pluto and other objects similar to its size a planet, just not in the same essence as the first 8 planets. It's more like a planet zone, not necessarily a planet itself, because like the new definition would take into account, we'd have 110 planets. But of course, when you cut out the whole orbits the sun and not orbits another object, I think you'd cut out quite a few of that 110. But we'll find out what happens here in the future. Especially definitely what happens when they get this new paper going through and seeing what the International Astronomical Union actually thinks about it, because the union's probably going to be like, hell no. But we'll find out. So cool. Is Pluto going to become the 9th planet again, or are we going to have 110 planets? And then we really wouldn't really have definitions. We would probably call them zones. Planet zones would probably make more sense than planets. This is the Jupiter zone, the Neptune zone, and then we go out the Pluto zone, or if they really just want to say the Kuiper zone, because obviously the Kuiper belt, it could just be the zones. Planet zones, it kind of goes with orbits, but it won't just be an orbit. It'll be like an orbit. So, whatever makes sense, but I don't know what you guys think. Is Pluto going to become a new planet? Is it going to regain its crown as planet number 9, or is it just going to get demoted even further? Thanks for watching, and I'm always here to keep you up to date on some random factoids and sciencey news and philosophical thoughts. Because, my mind is always muddled, so I can help make yours too.